Alex Tawanda Magaisa was one of Zimbabwe's most eminent public intellectuals, a graceful thinker, a man who made sophisticated constitutional concepts understandable to simple minds like mine. Magaisa was witty yet incisive, a truly accomplished legal mind and man. A man who could afford to live in relative comfort and didn't have to bother himself with the happenings of our beloved country, and yet he did. Week in, week out, he would take time to educate us through the Big Saturday Read, enriching our discourse one article at a time. There's at least 3 Properganda episodes that are based on BSR articles. Magaisa was generous with his time and tales of his childhood. It felt like we were always younger siblings. Rest warm, Mkoma Tawanda. You played your part. We'll take it from here. You might have heard that the government plans on paying once-off gratuities and monthly pensions to 160,000 war vets and ex-detainees who missed out on the first round of compensation in 1997. Is this still once-off if you keep doing it? The timing is very suspicious when you consider the current state of the economy, but then you remember that elections. It's that time of the 5-year cycle when ZANU-PF tries to show everyone how romantic it is. Also, what do you mean first round? What kind of round is this? Because I thought we all learned our lesson in 1997. Today's question is simple. Are Liberation War heroes, aka mawar vets, holding the country hostage? Or does the country owe them for their service in bringing this country's liberation? Ladies and gentlemen, war vets and unfocused youth, welcome to another episode of Properganda with Kandoro. To fully appreciate the situation, we need to go back to the Mgagao Declaration. And please stay with me because at some point, things might get confusing. But I promise you, it will all make sense in the end. Welcome to Dr. Hundri and the multiverse of corruption. In November of 1975, young military officers at a Zanla training camp in Tanzania came together and penned an agreement which we now know as the Mgagao Declaration. The declaration affirmed 2 very important things. 1, that armed struggle was the only way to depose the Rhodesian government. And 2, the removal of Ndabaninga Stole as leader of ZANU. The second point ultimately led to Robert Mugabe's elevation to ZANU president via special congress at Chimoyo in 1977. These clauses ended up being the foundation upon which Zimbabwe was built because liberation was indeed achieved through an armed struggle. Most of those young military men went on to become very highly decorated military men in post-independent Zimbabwe. They also had the added clout of being war veterans. And Robert Mugabe became, well, we all know what Robert Mugabe became. Basically, someone owed someone here. And like a conductor and afford, that someone fully intended to collect payment. It wasn't until 1995 when Chenjerai Hitler Hundri became president of the Zimbabwe National Liberation War Veterans Association that things kicked into high gear. A medical doctor by profession, Hundri used his medical clout to get members of the association compensation for invisible injuries such as post-war traumatic stress disorder. Obviously, this scam was not open to every Jack and Jill and Jokonia. You either had to be an important person yourself or you had to know important people for your forms to get priority. Some of the high-profile beneficiaries of this scheme included Joshua Nkomo's wife, Mama Mafiane, and Joyce Mjuru. But by 1997, the cat was out of the corruption bag, and as a result, the War Victims Compensation Fund was suspended. Robert Mugabe ordered that a commission of inquiry be set up to look into allegations that more than 450 million Zim dollars had been looted in 8 months. Back then, this was an alarming figure. Now it's just large. It's right around here that things get very, very tricky, but interesting. The suspension of the compensation fund quickly led to protests against the government from war vets who obviously hadn't benefited yet from the fund. It's always the broke boys who make. The war veterans were led to believe that the fund had been suspended by political bigwigs to stop legitimate war veterans from benefiting. But in reality, the fund had been suspended in an effort to protect it from a select group of war veterans who were abusing it. Do you want to take a guess as to who was doing the convincing and was front and center at these protests? Yeah, Muridzi move, Dr. Unj. And the protests turned violent. The commission hearings were consistently disrupted. Some high-ranking government officials were even held hostage. And on the 14th of November, 1997, Robert Mugabe finally gave in. He ordered the immediate payment of 50,000 Zim dollars to over 50,000 war veterans. Back in 1997, 50,000 Zim dollars was equivalent to 4,300 US dollars.
I would like to express my deep thanks to the government, especially to the President, Comrade Robert Mugabe, for having pushed for such lump sum to be given at one time. Though little, but it's better than nothing. And I hope this will alleviate the problems of the war veterans. As you know that the war veterans have been left out for quite some time. 17 years is not a short period, it's a spare of a time. And hence the problems have been accumulating from day to day. And I'm sure the 50,000 will go a long way into assisting the war veterans. I'm not saying that this is a good figure, but it is a gesture in the right direction.
Coincidentally, that was also the last day people saw the Zimbabwean economy. Because of the economic situation, it didn't take long for the lump sums to run dry. Within a year, war veterans had fresh protests. But this time around, they wanted something more substantial. Land. Right at the same time, trade unionists had come together and formed the Movement for Democratic Change in September of 1999. So to buy themselves time and political goodwill, the government allowed war veterans to seize farms, most of which were occupied by white commercial farmers. Guess who was also at the forefront of this third Shimreng? Yes, Dr. Chenjerai Hitler.
Now, the commercial farmers have been trying to say they offer the government some farms. They have nothing to offer the government. They have something to relinquish because they took our land. Yeah. Land is going to be taken by the government. If the government is going to delay taking the land, we will take it. Yeah.
Let's not waste each other's time. Everyone knows what happened during and after the illegal farm invasions. Over 3,000 white commercial farmers picked up. What no one realized at the time was they had also picked up the agriculture sector. The long and short of this is, between 1997 and 2001, the government of Zimbabwe made two very big concessions to appease war veterans. These two concessions, despite their motivations, had the most catastrophic effects on our country and economy. Over 2 decades later, we are still reeling. And yet, here we are in 2022, and war veterans are still looking for more concessions from the government. When it comes to war veterans, the question that keeps bothering me is, how many war veterans do we actually have? Because 42 years after the Liberation War, the number seems to be going up, which doesn't even make sense. In 1997, it's reported that 50,000 war veterans received lump sums. And yet in 2022, the number of war veterans and war collaborators is said to be around 207,000. If we're using nature's laws, isn't this number supposed to be going down? Even if you were to tell me that the 50,000 from 1997 were only those that had injury claims, it still doesn't compute. Mathematically, if we have 200,000 war vets in 2022, it means we had way more in 1997. Way, way more. That would mean that the government literally went broke paying out lump sums to less than a fifth of its single biggest constituents. Are you also trying to tell me that the war vets that didn't receive payouts in 1997, in this case, the majority were just okay with not getting 50,000 Zim dollars in 1997? Anyway, it's also very curious how whenever there's a falling out, war credentials are called to question. Joyce Mujuru's helicopter story was put under the spotlight after she was expelled from ZANU-PF in 2014. Jonathan Moore alleges that Victor Matemadanda was a taxi driver in Rhodesia during the war. But that's Jonathan Moore, so, you can believe him if you want. Even Chenjerai Uhunji, our main actor, his credentials are still contested to this day. Zipra's top brass deny having records of his training. What in total are we dealing with here? In the 27 years between now and 1997, ZANU-PF has had a very strange marriage of convenience with war veterans. And it is because of this marriage and the status that it brings that war veterans have gotten away with some very, very outlandish requests.
And the list of demands kept growing. The war veterans want preferential access to land, mining and economic opportunities, as well as better health and education benefits for ex-fighters and their children.
It's not lost on me that the recent announcement to pay out over 160,000 war veterans comes just months before the 2023 elections. It's also not lost on me how this allocation was not included in Mtuli's fiscal year. You put these two things together and you have another 1997, but on steroids. None of this is to say that our war vets should not get honored. They should. What we need to discuss and agree on is the manner in which they should be honored. Because what would be the point of getting monetary compensation under these economic conditions? If you're a Liberation War hero and you're watching this, I want to thank you for your service. Because you did that. It's giving courageous. Please don't sour that effort by holding the country you fought for hostage. Please stop giving a generation that never lived under Ian Smith any reason to think that Ian Smith was better. When you fight for your country's liberation, who are you doing it for? Is it for yourself or for the collective good? And when freedom does come, who owes who? Is it the civilian citizens that all Liberation War heroes, or is it the leaders whose leadership upon which the war effort is dependent on? Would it not be a bigger honor for you as a war veteran to live in a country where you don't have to mention that you're a war veteran, that you died for this country to get your way? Even if this plea falls on deaf ears, I take comfort in knowing that 2023 is coming. And when it does come, I'll be ready. Because I'm a registered voter. This has been another episode of Propaganda with Kandoro. Catch you guys next week.